that whole digital space then was so exciting because you were being like pirates. You were creating stuff that didn't exist yet. You were, talk about leaning into stuff that's uncomfortable.
Yep.
You're always going, this has never been done, don't know whether it can be done.
Yeah.
Let's see if it can be done. And I think that spirit was really exciting.
So today I'm having a gas with Laura Jordan Bambach, the Chief Creative Officer and President here at Grey London. One of the world's few female Chief Creative Officers, is former President of D&AD and has recently been named one of Britain's most influential people within the, how do I say that, Debrett's 500 annual list for the second year running, scooped up Individual of the Year at the, is that the Daddy Awards? Or the Daddy Awards?
The Daddy Awards.
Nice.
Yeah.
And has been awarded an honorary doctorate for her services to graphic design from the University of the Arts, London. So it's maybe one of the more nerve-wracking interviews that we've had to do for just facing off against, presence and experience. But thanks for having us, Laura.
It's such a pleasure. Thank you.
So it's really quiet out there, and we're used to that because it's been COVID-y, but of course that's not the reason today.
No, absolutely not. We've got a train strike, so we've asked everyone to stay home if they can.
You're being a good leader and not demanding they hike into the office.
Absolutely.
Brilliant stuff.
Yeah.
So I guess hitting the ground running, we know where you are now. We've discussed that. But, in the words of David Byrne, how did you get here? Because it's been a long journey and, you're right at the top. So for all people who want to be right at the top, how did you do it?
It has been a long journey. And I think the key has been that I never planned to be doing what I'm doing today. I never had this big end goal. I want to be a chief creative officer. I want to run an agency. Didn't even really know very much about what agencies were when I started out. But I had a couple of things that have really driven me, and that's been my focus. So one has been the power of creativity to create change in the world. Mm-hmm. And 100%, I've always believed in that. And then the second thing has been, I guess, I call it being comfortable, being uncomfortable, but like leaning into those places that I find maybe a little bit uncomfortable or that might challenge me a little bit as a way to grow. And I think those two things have been really fundamental, I guess, to my success. So I started out, I went to art school.
Yeah.
Partly I went to art school because I was passionate about art. Partly I went because I was also a bit of a nerd.
Right.
And I think there was an expectation, maybe not from my parents, but maybe a little bit of a push to maybe do something slightly nerdier and creative. I don't know, industrial design or architecture or what have you. They've been actually, I have to say, very, very supportive. But it was a bit like, I'm just going to do fine art and I'm not going to do anything nerdy at all, and I'm just going to explore. And I was really inspired when I was in year 11. So when's that? When I was 17. I was driving into the city in Sydney and I saw this billboard. This billboard was from one of the first, I guess, cyber feminist art groups called VNS Matrix. And it just said the clitoris is a direct line to the matrix, VNS Matrix. And it had this whole manifesto, which you must go and search for online because it's brilliant. And I went, that's the kind of thing I want to be doing.
Yeah.
So, went to art school, was very involved in politics, was very involved in sort of feminism and got very involved in cyber feminism, which is this, movement around women and women's body and connectivity in the digital age. And it was just before the internet had started to become I guess a public facing thing, a consumer
before it had grown the legs that it has now.
Yeah, when it was still Mosaic, and it was very much, well, you're connecting to people one-on-one or what have you, and everything's text-based, and it's, something used for research maybe at university, but got very heavily into that. Had some amazing lecturers who saw that I had a real interest and aptitude for some of the more geeky stuff, and so gave me more.
What kind of stuff are we talking, the more geeky stuff?
So, whether it was that sort of beginnings of the pre-commercial internet, or whether it was, programming in Director, or the precursors to Flash, like Future Splash, or hypercard before HTML started. So, interesting ways of telling stories through code. So I was exploring all of those things. And then the internet hit when I was in, so it was 1994. This is how old I am. 1994, so that was in my third year of university. And I just went, this is brilliant because I can take everything about what I'm passionate about in terms of sort of politics and making the world a better place and using creativity and combine it with something that has the potential to connect millions of people all over the world, even though it was probably, however many thousand at the beginning. And that's what I want to focus on in terms of telling my story or telling my stories. So I sort of pivoted and started doing stuff in that space. At the same time, there was this amazing woman called Rosie Cross, who I'll be forever. She's still a lovely friend and mentor and one of the best humans on the planet. And she had started something called Geek Girl. And that was the world's first cyber-feminist hyperzine. So that is a magazine and a website. And because there weren't very many websites as well, it was incredibly popular. I think it was like one of the top 20 sites in Microsoft used to do a list of like the coolest sites in the world.
Was that like cool brands for websites, like a coffee table?
Yeah, I mean, there were hardly even any brands on there. It was all weird shit back then. So she had this magazine, and I think in maybe issue 2 or 3, I came across her. It's a long-winded story, but it is a long-winded story. I came across her because I used to sell sell clothes secondhand at a market to make money for university, alongside doing a bunch of other things to make money. And she had a little stall there, and she had her magazines, and I'd gone to her launch, and I thought she was amazing. She had a magazine. She had these little stickers that said, put down your pony and pick up a computer, and girls need modems. And I just thought she was the best. And I've got a tattoo of an Escher. It's like an infinite tessellation of like spiders and scorpions, I guess, on my stomach. She saw it and she went, that's a web. It's a World Wide Web. I'd love to take a photograph of it for my magazine. And I went, yes. And then she called me and said, we're not going to be able to take the photo. The photographer's dropped out. And I went, I've done photography at uni. I can take a photo of my stomach, which I did, actually just using photo booth. And then she said, we're not going to be able to do our issue this month because I think the person who was designing it had, again, dropped out. And it was all, she had this small group of people who were sort of volunteering, and she's an amazing journalist, and she was collecting, all the interviews and sort of putting the thing together as the sort of editor-in-chief. But she didn't have anyone to kind of build that framework. And I went, well, I've done a bit of that at university. I can do that. And she just said, anything that you learn how to do, I'll give you a space for it on Geek Girl. So that's when I really started getting heavily into web design, into animation for the web, into storytelling for the web. So all of that was happening, and that my artwork was kind of moving in that direction. And I was doing lots of installation art, like digital installation art as well. And then I realized, in the spirit of entrepreneurship and trying to find ways to support myself through university, that I could use a lot of my skills that I was using for my art and make money from it, because no one else knew how to cut and code, and it was all done by hand, and it was before there was any WYSIWYG software or anything, so it was all done in Notepad, and you'd have to basically write it and then bring it into Netscape at the time and see what it looked like and take it back.
So so writing code was a much more long-winded process. You'd have to write it in a text editor, shove it into the thing that ran the program, and then try and figure out retrospectively what went wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. And also because the internet is, it's still open and free, but it's incredibly easy to get people's source code. So you could go and see something that you liked on the web and then have a look at the source code and figure out how they did it, and then take that bit of code and put it in your code and see what works and what didn't work. And so all that experimentation was great, but I became really good and fast at cutting, coding, and building websites. So I went, okay, this is a business. So I started my own business called Joystick Digital Media, which at the time was kind of almost like a piss take of all the gamer boys and their joysticks. And worked with my brother a lot, who's an amazing coder as well. And I would go into agencies and they would usually give me Photoshop files or InDesign files or something and go, okay, we've designed this thing, but how do we get it on there, pointing to the computer?
Yeah.
And so again, I'd like cut and code it, I'd resize everything. If they needed a database, I'd do them a database. If they, whatever they needed, sort of build them their thing, and charge them a decent amount of money for it, and basically sleep on their floor for 72 hours. And then that would pay for me for like a couple of weeks of not having to do anything else apart from university. So that's kind of how I got started and how I was introduced to agency world. And then I was also, by this stage, I'd moved from my bachelor degree into doing like a practical master's. So a Master of Art in Fine Art. And, and I guess at that point, the studying and what I was supposed to be doing at university was getting much more heavy. And so I was I was kind of based a lot more around the university. So they didn't have a digital media degree. They'd asked me to kind of write a digital media degree, which I did and started to teach the first years. So I was kind of working, doing stuff and doing university and then teaching 1 day a week. And the university asked this person to come and speak the college asked this person to come and speak at the college. A guy called Simon Waterfall, he was another D&AD president, but a total inspiration and mentor, and has helped me a lot through my career. And so I went as the lecturer, I guess, and watched him talk. He turned up, he might have been in a wedding dress or something, and he had a blue mohawk, and that the work that he was doing at his agency called Deep End was the most incredible digital work at the time. It just blew everything else away. They were based here in London, but they were opening an office in Sydney, and I just said, I really want to come and work for you as a designer. But I had no qualifications as a designer, and their agency hired only the very, very best designers in the world. So it's like, well, you can't have a job as a designer, but next time I'm here in Sydney, bring me your portfolio again, and I'll go through it again and tell you what I think you need to know, and really helped to guide me. And that feels like it must have been for about 12 months, but I can't really remember. Finally, he said, look, I've got a job at the Sydney Deep End. It's not as a designer, because you're still not good enough to be a designer, but it's as a producer. Do you want to take it? And I thought, I absolutely would like to take it. So that was my first full-time agency job. And I was there for quite a while, learning from the best designers in the world who were all around me. And then I was keen to move over to London, and he said, look, we've got a design job in London, and if you want to move over, it's the most junior designer, you'll be on 12 grand a year. But if you want to drop everything and come over. So I went, okay. And I think within 6 weeks I'd packed up my life in Sydney and moved over here. And suddenly I was working in an atmosphere with like literally the best designers in the world. And actually, some of the people I used to share a desk with Lolly, who's at McCann now, with Rob as their two CCOs. And so, I was sitting next to Lolly, watching how he worked, and it was a phenomenal experience. And that's really how I both got settled in London and kind of kicked off my career here. I mean, that whole digital space then was so exciting, because you were being like pirates. You were creating stuff that didn't exist yet. You were, talk about leaning into stuff that's uncomfortable.
Yep.
You're always going, this has never been done, don't know whether it can be done.
Yeah. Let's
see if it can be done. And I think that spirit was really exciting. From there, I went to an agency called Lateral, which was fascinating, and I learned so much from, because it was run more as almost like an anarchist collective than an agency, and it was only ever 30 people, and they were really specific about the briefs and the clients that they took on, and every single person within the agency had a say in what clients came into the business. So I found that really fascinating, and kind of, did that for a while, and then went and got my first head of design job, which led me back to a lot of people that I used to work with at Deep End, who had part of Deep End at that time was an agency called Glue, which was the digital advertising part of the bigger business. And they were still going, and I went back there as their head of art. And so I was looking after all the designers and makers and a little bit of tech, and there wasn't really user experience back then, but all that is the making bit of the agency. So I was looking after all of that. Was there for quite a long time. I think Glue has become Isobauer, and now Isobauer is very recently no longer.
It's one of the things you have to do in Adland, don't you? There's always a family tree. It's like they became that, who became that, who were absorbed by them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then I had my son. So I went off for 9 months, came back. Number one, realised that my two kind of design directors that were kind of working with me, for me, because I never like saying for me. It's not I don't like hierarchy in businesses at all. But we're doing an amazing job without me. And also I realised that I was much more ambitious than maybe the job I was coming back to. And I didn't want to come back necessarily 4 days a week, and I didn't want to be limited by being a mum. Glue were an amazing place to work, but myself and the MD were the first two people ever to have babies, ever, in the agency. We both went off on maternity leave in the same week. And I came back and I just felt like I needed to take a step. I also didn't have the time anymore with a small baby to keep relearning programming languages.
Yeah.
Like Flash had changed while I was gone. Cascading style sheets had appeared in the 9 months I was gone. And I'm like, shit, I've got to, So everything had changed and become more complex. And that is just the way of technology. So I thought, what I need to really be doing is I need to be doing the creative bit, the bit that doesn't change, because I understand how everything is made. So I should be able to do a really good job at kind of leading those projects, but not necessarily making them as much. So I had an opportunity to go to LBI. Again, that story, LBI became Digitas LBI, has now become part of Publicis and what have you. And I went in there as a group creative director, very much in a way outside of my comfort zone, and then realised it was doing okay, and then got promoted to joint ECD there within the first 8 months or something like that with Simon Gill. Was there for quite a long time building that business. Then just wanted to, because that business does, it does the creative stuff, which is what I was brought in to do, but it also does, which I find really interesting, the big platform stuff. And, it was like the future of banking apps, and it was the future of travel booking and all sorts of different things. But
what year are we talking here, did you say?
This was maybe 20, I guess I went there must have gone there in 2008 or 9.
So we really are before the big bang of those kind of products you were describing, where everything was going to be in an app within 6 years and we didn't yet know it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was still a really new space in terms of social media too. So there were all sorts of interesting things to explore. Facebook still had an open API, so you could suck it into other sites. And then I just wanted to get back to kind of the pure creativity again. Went to DEF 12 months, met my two business partners who I formed Mr. President with, popped outside to run my own agency for 8 years, and then I've come here. So there we go.
Yeah.
Long, convoluted story. But always, like I said, with those two things in mind, that creativity's got the power to change the world, change culture, and that we've got a responsibility to do that. And by leaning into the things that make you feel uncomfortable, it's a really interesting way to keep learning.
Well, it's interesting that you opened up with those two, let's say, core beliefs that drive everything you do, and they kept coming back in the story. So one thing we kept hearing is if you're going to progress to a leadership position, let's say like the one you have to exist on the edge, because that's where all the new stuff is. All the stuff that's in here is already understood. But you were in 1994 interfacing with code, which now is kind of, learn to code became a cliche, didn't it? It became the new learn to type. But you were doing that before Toy Story came out, even, which is, so before computers were even a mainstream idea that people should have them. So you're in a position where you're at the edge learning new stuff, which means that if you can master it, you can teach that to the people who need to know it. And this happened. So you came into agency life, and you said they were using Photoshop, but didn't yet know how to actually get it into maybe, say, a website or something like that. So they're actually pulling you out of the ether saying this person needs to show us how to actually use the stuff that we now have.
Yeah, absolutely.
So do you see anything happening for people right now that you say, get into that, because then you will be a future leader?
Oh my goodness. Look, I think in terms of like the output that we create, the media that we use, there are loads of different things, I think. And they're not necessarily all new things, but I think they're unexplored things. I think just taking something like contextual advertising, for example, I don't think the possibilities of that have been explored in any way.
Yeah.
I think there's, other places like everyone's talking about the metaverse, but really, there is no the metaverse. There are many different metaverses. A lot of them are actually games. I'd like to think about them in that way. And what is actually appropriate and not appropriate for brands to be doing, and are we in there playing with it, or are we in there setting up a version of I don't know whether anyone remembers Second Life.
Yes, of course.
But another version of Second Life where you're building stuff that no one comes to, and it's full of all the problems that Second Life had as well.
Which, if you want to go on Wikipedia and search Second Life, you'll find what Laura's referring to.
Yeah, man, it was a dark and dangerous place for a woman. That place, I have to say. I think it's interesting conceptually to think about that. I think AI is phenomenally interesting and exciting, and then thinking about what that means in terms of ethical AI and how you could be working with your clients to remove biases rather than build on the biases that just naturally exist in spaces and data sets and what have you. I think that's really fascinating. I mean, there's so many fascinating things. There's still much more to be done just in terms of a simple poster. But I think the main thing is the curiosity, what is out there, what's in my toolbox, what can I be using? And what I've seen is every agency that's pinned themselves to an output has died, and agencies that have constantly been curious and explored are the ones that have survived. And that's why coming here is really interesting. It's our 105th year this year. Because the only way we've made it to 105 years old, and I think that makes us the oldest continuous ad agency in the world.
Yeah, because JWT has been...
Exactly, everyone else has been merged. I'm really proud of that, being at the helm of this agency that feels super traditional, but actually the only way it has stayed around is because it adapts to things, really, really well. I
can kind of think of an example of what you're describing there, and maybe this is an example of the forward-thinking attitude that you bring to the agency, but maybe it was an idea that came together some other way. But I'm thinking about the work that you've been doing with Pringles, and a lot of it has not been traditional Pringles, which is to say print TV ad. You've been doing stuff with NPCs, which I believe is non-playable characters in video games. And I think I saw something else that you'll have to explain to me as well, which was also like a tone.
Yes. Yeah? So I'm super proud of that one. I will say actually, in terms of Pringles, we have a really great model with them, which we call the 70-20-10 model, because they will always need the core of what they do to be the stuff that, the more traditional stuff. They need their TV ads and they need their cut downs, and because when you're working with complex global brands and you have local markets who are in different kind of stages of development, or they might use different social platforms or what have you, it's really important to have those core universal assets. So that stuff is always a part of whatever we do. You've got kind of the 10%, which is the stuff that's way out, the future stuff, and you've got 20%, which is that sort of amplification of that core. So we do a bit of everything. So the Pringles Sonic work is actually was a 10% idea.
Yeah.
And for Pringles, gaming is one of the sort of the big pillars of their brand.
Yeah.
As it is with a lot of snack brands. And because a lot of snack brands are in that space, it's also incredibly competitive. That audience are really hard to talk to as well, because you have to be, use the word authenticity, but you have to be really authentic and you have to know your shit to be in that space.
Yeah, because they can see outsiders a mile away.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think to more or less degree, everyone, because you've got access to the internet, can kind of sniff things out. But that gaming audience is particularly cynical, I would say. So this particular piece was for the 40th anniversary of the ZX Spectrum. It ties into a bigger campaign where we're actually talking about the history of Pringles, which was invented on a supercomputer, and it's talking about taking the past into the present. We thought there'd be an interesting thing in taking the present into the past. And you don't get an opportunity like celebrating the birth of modern gaming as this birthday. So,
and what was that system, just for
so it's called the ZX Spectrum. And for any of you who didn't have a ZX Spectrum or weren't around when all computers used to do this, the way that computers would take code and understand code was through binary code transformed into audio, which you put in a cassette and you played it into your computer, and it would take forever to load, and then that's how you would get your game or your whatever. So when I was a kid, the computers at school, they all had cassettes, and you had to pop the cassette in to do anything.
Is that also why you can, I don't know, you have automated phone systems that say press 2 and it makes a tone? Is that how it interprets the tone, or is that different?
Quite possibly, actually. I don't know about automated. I expect not so anymore, but they did. But it's how, it's the same, like you have the modem sound that you used to...
All that stuff that went... yeah.
Like that, yeah. So that kind of a sound is the sound. And it's also really interesting because in a lot of places, particularly in Eastern Europe, where you couldn't get access to the games, radio stations would play the sounds on the radio station, like say midnight on a Saturday night. And if you're a kid, you would sit there with your tape deck and you would record the sound off the radio, and that's how you would get your games. That
is amazing.
Yeah.
That's so cool. Yeah. So literally a bunch of tones translated into code that would run a program.
Absolutely. So for the birthday, we created a game, a competition for the ZX Spectrum. We launched it with a video on YouTube just talking about the birth of modern gaming and celebrating the ZX Spectrum. But if you recorded it off YouTube, put it onto a cassette tape or into a ZX Spectrum emulator or plugged it into your actual machine, you could play this little game and you could win a 8-bit chip, which was a special limited edition thing for the first person to get to it. And you would think something that geeky would take a really, really long time to be decoded, but actually it was quite quick. I think it was within an hour or two.
No way. I thought you were going to say it in a week.
No, it was amazing. And the lovely thing about it is, although you're speaking to a small audience of like OG gamers, there is a big audience of gamers who overheard it, who actually, got to see the campaign in other ways, or watch the video, or hear about it on Twitch or what have you. So, yeah, that was super fun.
And you're able to stay ahead of the curve in this way because you were there at the beginning, for example, and it's been a keen interest for you the whole way through.
Yeah.
Because it seems like you occupy a really interesting Venn diagram of aesthetic, creative interest, and basically engineering and code and the hard stuff.
Yeah, I mean it's my personal passion, but obviously it's also not just me. The Pringles team here and the team that work on the gaming stuff are phenomenal. Yeah. Right? They're absolutely phenomenal. The game was actually produced in-house by creative tech. The design was done using the original kind of design specs for the ZX Spectrum by one of our designers. There was a real labour of love from a lot of people that have that passion. And one of the lovely things about working here is you have so many people with so many different intersecting passions.
Yeah.
They get you to all sorts of interesting ideas.
And this is what you like. Everyone was saying this. I feel like we're kind of past the typical pandemic conversation points. 2 years ago when I was doing this, we'd all talk about it's better when everyone's in the office, and the big debate was going on. But it sounds like you're a champion of that idea. So that it's good to have everyone around, like sort of atoms crashing into each other, because you just don't know what's going to happen with each impact.
Yeah, and this is maybe a less interesting functional thing, but one of the things that we do here is, we are fully flexible, but we have what we call one fix, one flex. So for the most part, you come in on your fixed day, which is a day that we assign for departments. So anyone involved in making stuff, strategists, creatives, designers, tech, whoever it is, editors, they all come in on a Tuesday. And that allows us to kind of smash stuff together. And different departments will come in different days, and then we ask people to come in a second flex day. Some people don't come in at all. Some people come in 5 days a week. But for the most part, because we've got a really lovely culture here of sharing and experimentation and openness, people are coming into the office a lot, which is really nice. Obviously not today with the train strike, but usually. And we have a real belief here at Grey in what we call the collision of difference. So, Grey has always stood for famously effective work. You create that famously effective work through really kind of shifts in culture and making stuff that is properly culturally impactful. But most importantly, I think for us, and particularly us in London, where we are in this amazing city, is what we call a collision of difference. And it's a really simple belief that the more diverse the input, the more interesting the output. So the more you can come together, the more you can smash things together, the more you lean into, employing and creating a sense of belonging across the whole spectrum of, people who might want to work here, the better the work is going to be.
Yeah, and to go to your initial point of saying lean into things that make you uncomfortable, which I believe is essential. I think it's the only place that you actually grow, because it's where all the stuff you don't know is.
Yeah.
You mentioned diversity there, and we're talking about making sure that we're constantly trying to pull people into the workforce that you wouldn't think to pull in, because things have a tendency to drive towards orthodoxy.
Yeah.
This is working. Do more of this.
Yeah.
So you're always looking out for trying not to do that and saying, right, that's working, cool. What have we not even tried yet that might work?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, it's something that I've always believed in, but I ran something with a group of people called the Great British Diversity Experiment. I want to say maybe in 2016. Feels like a long time ago.
Yes, it does.
And that was the largest practical experiment looking at diverse creativity. So whether diverse creative teams actually make better work than non-diverse teams. If so, what are the barriers in the way to, because we know that the industry really isn't diverse. So what are those barriers that are getting in the way to stop us building those teams, including those teams? How might we change ourselves to create a more diverse agency, and to check all those hypotheses? So as a proper piece of research, 250 people, all working on a brief for Tesco, with a research agency, Flamingo, who came in and actually did the serious research bit over 13 weeks. And we got a lot of really interesting learnings from it. But one of the most interesting learnings, so there were 40 mentors working across 20 teams, all working on this brief. And if you think that each of these mentors is given hours and hours of their time every single week for 13 weeks, they're all 100% passionate about diverse teams and having them flourish. But what we found is the traditional way of running a creative team, which is much more about hierarchy, much more about leading from the top down, squashed the benefits of those diverse teams, because you end up forcing people into a cultural consensus, even if they don't naturally fit there. I think we're used to having to go faster, get to ideas faster, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. Everyone loves them. That's easy when you've got cultural consensus because everyone comes from the same place. It is much harder when you don't have that to begin with. Yeah. And because then there was this pressure to conform, those teams fell apart. So a lot of the teams that just, didn't perform or underperformed, and you see that, in agencies, and then it's like, well, it doesn't work for us, diversity doesn't work for us, or they're just not as good as the whatever, was just this pressure to conform, and this pressure feeling like you have the weight of whoever you might represent on your shoulders as well. Stop them from doing their job. The teams that had the best ideas, who worked best as a team, where everything was flowing and that energy was there, were led by what we called kind of clear enablers. So those are people who are able to kind of sit back, allow the group to coalesce, which is messy because creativity is messy, but help to show them a clear path forwards into whatever that idea is. And that is not what we've always been told is a good creative leader, traditionally, and running She Says, which I do, which is, the largest global network to advance women's careers in the creative industries, I mentor a lot of women particularly, and it's not just a female thing, but it is for a lot of women. They're told that they're not ECD material or they're not chief creative officer material because they're not strong enough and they don't stamp their authority. Mm-hmm. What really clearly came from this is stamping your authority and being that traditionally good creative leader leads to, you either have to have a team that's all like you or it all kind of falls apart.
Yeah.
So I think if we're going to grow diversity and grow different thinking in the industry, we have to start, which hopefully we are, because you're seeing a lot more in terms of more interesting leaders. You've got to shift to a different kind of leadership to get a different kind of result.
Well, let's hope that's what's happening here at Grey. I can't tell. I've had to glance at my watch because, like an idiot, I said I'm going to leave a full screen clock over there in front of an OG computer user who knows like everything about it, and forgot to set it to not turn off. So we've got about 5 minutes left.
Oh, gee, wow!
I know
okay.
It goes, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So in terms of wrapping up,
yes.
There's so much to talk about that I could probably go for another 2 hours. But one thing I wanted to pick up on was for people who are going to be entering this stage, was you mentioned the rate of transformation in, I think everything is what you were describing, in everything.
Yep.
And if you have to take any time off at all. And some, people are having more and more ambitions to do that. You can't see on camera Vicky here, who works with us at Gas, has, would like to maybe take a few months or, something off to go and travel with your other half. And that's a great thing to do. And I would like to at some point have kids. Yeah. And, I'd like to take a lot of time off just to be with them. Yeah. What happens when you come back and everything's changed?
I think the most important thing is to not be too embarrassed to ask questions. And to say, this thing has changed. What do I do, or how do I approach it? Yeah. Like a ridiculous example, but it was really impactful for me, is banner ads changed their name from banner ads to display advertising in the 9 months I was on maternity leave. And I literally came back to the office, everyone's talking about display advertising. I'm the head of art. I'm like, what the fuck is display advertising? And I'm too embarrassed to ask. I was there on the internet trying to find out, like...
Yeah. And are you worried that you expose a bit of vulnerability and everyone goes, they're not in charge anymore, exactly. It's my turn?
And then you realise you've just got to be vulnerable. You have to work as a team. The stuff that you don't know, someone else knows. I had a creative director I worked with called Abby Ellis, who's just a superstar. She said the best thing to me, like the best piece of advice ever, and I would give it to anyone, is focus on the things that you're brilliant at and make them shine like the sun so much that they shine out everything else, because the thing that is not your sun is someone else's sun. So just, teamwork, focusing on the things you love and you're good at, bringing the new experiences you have back into that story, because it'll make you a different person and give you a different point of view. That's the most important thing.
Great. So I suppose let's try and do a quick wrap up, how to be a Laura Jordan Bambach. One thing, exist on the edge, be where the new stuff is, and don't be scared of it. Try and go to where you're scared. Yeah, because that's where you're going to learn stuff. When you meet great people, like, I'm really sorry, I forgot who it was who liked your tattoo so much. The world.
Oh, Rosie Cross.
Yeah, when you meet someone who gives you an opportunity, just say yes. Yeah. Go for it. And then when you're that person, pay it forward.
100% pay it forward. That's the most important thing, I think. I couldn't have done it without, Rosie and Simon and a couple of other people in my career who've just really seen something in me that I didn't see in myself or seen my potential. So look for people's potential and help to grow it.
Brilliant. Well, let's leave it there. Laura Jordan Bambach, thank you very much.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Cheers.